As legacy CRMs continue to age, are they getting too complex and too bloated to provide the business value needed? Let's explore how CRM has to change in this episode of Closing Time. Thanks for tuning into Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Chip House, CMO at Insightly CRM, and I'm joined today by Mike Topalovich, a solutions architect and consultant with specialization in CRM. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, Chip. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And, Mike, I was excited to talk to you because you're really passionate about this topic of CRM. And so I'm really grateful that we get to have this discussion.
Doesn't take much to get me excited, but yeah, this is absolutely something, I think a lot about.
So you've been around the CRM market for quite a while. Being the CMO of a CRM company, I think a lot about this topic as well. And, we've done some research over the past few years that talks about, some of the challenges that now exist for especially mid-market organizations for adopting a CRM inside of their organization and getting true business value from it. And so it made me think a little bit about Crossing the Chasm and that book, which was embraced by so much of the SaaS community over the past several years. And it details how innovations diffuse across population. You mentioned that you feel a lot of CRMs that have come along that started out strong early are really now at the laggard stage. So talk to me about that.
So if you just kind of trace, really what Crossing the Chasm, what the adopter curve, the technology adoption curve is trying to measure is how quickly do new customers come onto your platform, your software, your technology in general, right? So with Salesforce, I was an early adopter of Salesforce because I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And what we focused on with CRM back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s was table stakes. It was getting very basic business processes right. So the early adopters on CRM, or at least SaaS-based CRM back in the day, were really focused on automating things other than CRM processes. They weren't worried about pipeline management. They weren't worried about a lot of the traditional selling capabilities of CRM. They were starting to worry more about their core business processes and how they integrated into CRM. So from there, we started to see a proliferation of CRMs that focused on integration, CRMs that focused on very specific functionality, CRMs that focused on, one little thing. And then eventually the market became saturated. There was consolidation. Salesforce became the de facto winner in that game. But with the Crossing the Chasm reference that we were talking to, especially with Salesforce, which is my bread and butter, you saw early 2000s, you saw the early adopters get on the platform, right? The Force.com platform, whatever it's called today, gave you the ability to extend beyond CRM. And that was a huge capability that went far beyond what anybody else was providing. So we had the early adopters, we had the fast followers, and then the early majority started to come onto the platform, I would say probably late 2000s. And after that, we started to see the late majority. We started to see the laggards start to come on. So when I talk about laggards, it is kind of a two-sided street here where I do feel, some of the legacy CRM providers are laggards in themselves just because they've become so big and so their architecture has become so bloated over the years. But you also have the laggards in terms of the former Siebel customers and former, Oracle customers that are now saying, hey, we have seen the light of SaaS. We want to move on to something like an Insightly or a Salesforce. What does that look like today? And those dynamics are making CRM in general very interesting because companies like Insightly and Salesforce, as you start to rely more on the enterprise dollar and the laggards coming onto the platform, you become constrained by their ability to move forward. So you have this dichotomy between the early adopters, fast followers, and then the late majority and the laggards. And there becomes a conflict where the early adopters want to move really, really, really fast, but they can't anymore because now the platform needs to constrain itself or not move as fast for, again, the late followers, the late majority, and the laggards. So what I see today is a lot of going back to the basics, trying to get business process right, trying to align to things like value streams, right? We're going back and, it seems like everybody is having what Mark Zuckerberg called their year of efficiency, right? The economy's not so hot right now. We're all trying to figure out what's going on. So we're going back and figuring out the basics And then we're trying to figure out, okay, in this grand scheme of software as a service and CRM, what actually matters to us and what do we want to build on moving forward?
Well, it's interesting because early on, really just being SaaS, being in the cloud was one of the main differentiators, right? Especially for the brand that you talked about that has the big blue cloud logo, right? It seems like over time, as they've tried to solve needs for more and more different types of companies or larger companies, enterprises, that's kind of added to some of the bloat and the heaviness. But drill into that a little bit. Can you provide some other details of the challenges there? What makes the bloating a problem? How does that become a specific problem for an organization when they go to implement it or support it over time?
Yeah, so there's two sides to this coin. One side being the technical issues, the other side being just the business issues or the management of the technology architecture. So when we talk about bloating, when I talk about SaaS sprawl, you're absolutely correct. The value proposition of early cloud providers was, hey, we're on the cloud. Well, cloud computing, fantastic. It really did change the way that we manage technology, but it became a little bit too easy to roll out. Okay, I could slap down a credit card as a business user and get 2 licenses of a tool that will help me with my personal workflow or my team workflow. But then over time, that sprawl, there's hundreds of these instances of enterprise applications or SaaS applications that have just popped up. And then if you flip over to the business side, you have the CFO trying to figure out right now, what am I paying for? You have the CIO or the CTO trying to absorb just what is out there in my enterprise. What do I have to know about? Where does my data live? And this complexity just creates management overhead, and it creates true business risk in that you could be putting data out in the cloud or in these applications, and maybe it's not a trusted service provider. There's just all these implications of the sprawl, right? So now we're getting to the point where we're saying, okay, well, what do we want our SaaS applications to actually do? And this is where we're starting to see differentiators in the different types of applications, CRM being, what we're talking about, where, okay, do I want to focus on core functionality? Is pipeline management, interaction management, contact management my most important thing? Or is it the platform? Do I want to build on a platform? Do I want to build my own stuff, write my own custom code, have my own custom workflows? Or do I want to have out of the box integration capabilities, right? With the company with the big blue logo on the box, they acquired a very large company to help with integration. But for the smaller shops, if you want to do integration, you either hope that that provider that you're integrating with has a pre-built integration for you, or you have to build it yourself. And then companies like Insightly, have their plugins or their integrations that they have that they make available to their customers. I love that model. I think that type of model, the plugin model over the marketplace model, will truly be the driver of integrations and connections moving forward. But it's interesting to me, having gone through this whole evolution over the last 15 years, where yes, we are SaaS, we are cloud, buy our stuff. And now it's okay, we're SaaS, we're cloud, that's table stakes. How well do we integrate? How well do we provide core functionality? How well do we secure your data? You're starting to look at the functional level. You're starting to look at the ilities, right? Does it have scalability? Does it have reliability? You're starting to look at a lot of those things. And it's like, well, we were looking at this with enterprise software. We were looking at this with packaged software. And now we're starting to see those, that thinking come around again.
There's so much there to dig into, but I'm going to start with just the promise of platform, right? Because that was exciting initially, to think about one platform, a single view of the customer, that managed Salesforce automation and project management and service and marketing, et cetera, et cetera. But some of the legacy CRMs have gone the route of acquisition to get there, right? Which have led to more complexity, needing more hands making all the gears work, right? And so one of the things that we think about when we think about legacy CRM is the fact that there's the cost of the software and then there's the total cost of ownership, which can be two very different things because you have to implement it, you have to train, you have to support it. And as the platform itself gets more complex, you need people who know how it works. You almost need like a trained, admin slash engineer to support it ongoing. And so the total cost of ownership, TCO, is made about a bunch of different things. But what didn't I talk about there? I mean, talk to me more about just the realities of a high TCO of a legacy platform.
You alluded to the point of cost not necessarily being a dollar cost, or at least that's something I pick up because maybe that's just the way I like to frame things. But when we think of total cost of ownership, we tend to put things into monetary terms. Like, oh, if I buy Salesforce or if I buy Insightly or if I buy anybody, it's this up front and then this to maintain it. And just what I've seen over the last 20 years, to the point where I don't want to say it's comical, but I see the same things over and over again. It's we're going to spend a bunch of money on the licenses and then, oh, wow, it costs money to maintain this. I've actually gone beyond that, thinking that's just kind of table stakes at this point. Yes, you buy a CRM, you're going to have some level of engineering or administration to keep it up to date, to keep it functioning, to keep the data clean. There are all sorts of ancillary roles that go into managing a CRM. But just in general, in enterprise software in general, I think that the total cost of ownership really comes down to the cost of managing complexity. So the more tools you have, the more functionality you have within these tools, the more different human mental models you have from the users using the system, it just becomes very, very difficult to manage that complexity over time. And just the management overhead of these different systems, nobody really takes that into account. I am totally guilty of that. I've worked in a ISV capacity, a consulting capacity, and also as an end user. And you get to a point where you start to realize just the overhead of running this system is this. If we want to increase our capacity so that we can actually roll out new stuff for our users, we need to add this and this and this and this. And all of a sudden, you're looking at an organization of 10 to 12 people just managing CRM, which, for some organizations makes sense. For other organizations, it's absurd. So this all goes back to planning. You have to plan for what you need out of your CRM so that you're buying the right software. You have to plan for how you're going to manage it over time, how you're going to implement it. CRM's complex. It's not hard, it's complex. And with that complexity comes management overhead. And like you said, administrators, architects, developers, right? Everybody has to play a role in this because it does require constant care and feeding. It's not a one-time buy it, set it, and forget it. You have to manage this over time.
Yeah, that's entirely true. So, and we actually recently just studied this with a third party GTM partners who looked into our platform, and our customers see time to ROI, time to live, much faster than some of these legacy systems because the non-monetary expenses are real for a business, right? I mean, just the fact that it's not specifically dollars, how quickly you can get live, how quickly you can repay your investments is super, super critical. But the other thing that I think companies struggle with when they think about leaving a CRM platform or really any platform, right, is just the cost of changing, right? And which can be sometimes significant, but often there is a path to change. And, I think companies struggle with this sunk cost fallacy. So I know you have an opinion on this. What's your thought about that?
So the sunk cost fallacy is a great one. When we were talking about the complexity of managing CRM, right? There's the cost that's associated with managing that overhead. Of course, there's dollar or monetary measurement of it, but then there's other measurements of it. So like now we're starting to talk about with change, we're asking human beings to change. As human beings, we don't do that very well. We need a lot of help. And when you introduce really large change, the chances of it being absorbed, especially in today's environment where we're all so hyper sliced, our attention is, we're being pinged by 10,000 different people all the time. We have notifications all over the place. Nobody can focus on anything. So in the olden days of CRM, like you would buy Siebel and you would send everybody to training for 2 weeks and, they would learn 10% of the system and maybe you got some value out of it. We don't have that luxury these days. I just worked in an environment where I couldn't get my users to spend 5 minutes training, let alone 5 days. So that type of change now, when we talk about offloading from a legacy CRM or any legacy system to a new system, you have to think about that change differently because the human cost, the switching cost, the cognitive load, just people have too much on their minds. People are too stressed out. Why would you dump a whole bunch of new stress on people just to get an incremental gain or save a little money with the new, with the new CRM? You have to think that through. What is the impact on the humans? What is the impact on the business to roll this out? And then is that juice worth the squeeze? There's so many different elements that go into it. Again, monetary considerations is what we tend to focus on, but just think about the human costs. Think about the impact to the organization on such a substantial change. Is it something you could do incrementally? Is it something where if I've got 10, 20,000 users on a legacy CRM, I need to move them to something more agile, something cloud-based, something software as a service based? Start moving pockets of functionality first. Look at switching costs. Do you have teams that have never used CRM before, who have used it lightly, who don't need to unlearn an old CRM and learn a new CRM? Can you start with them? Or do you have a new business process you're bringing online? Is this an opportunity for you to do something faster where, the IT organization may not have responded as quickly before? Can I go out and maybe buy a new CRM and then take the time on the back end to move things over slowly over time in a way that doesn't, impact the business, that doesn't impact the users? There's a lot of different thoughts that go into this, but the original question had to do with sunk cost. And I think at this point, you have to evaluate the cost of everything from this point forward, whether it's the additional dollars to finish implementing a CRM, whether it's the human cost of switching from one system to another and having to learn a new system, the integration costs, the potential risk of losing data during a migration, of losing customers during a migration, all these things. Nothing is a simple choice anymore. You have to evaluate all these things incrementally and holistically to get to the point where you then decide, this is the reason why I want to move to a new CRM. This is the new CRM I want to move to. What does that migration path look like? It's a lot of planning and it's a lot of upfront thinking, which I know is not attractive to companies who want to grow and move fast. But this is what we're looking at. Everything has a cost associated with it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because most organizations are struggling with their CRM. A good share from our research says, 79% are unsatisfied with their CRM. And when we ask them why, they'll say things like, it's difficult to support, it's costly to support, it's difficult or costly to integrate, it's not as flexible as we thought it would be, it's harder to adopt, harder to use. And so there's real reasons for organizations, especially those that are smaller, that maybe don't have enterprise level resources, to think about just a different path for CRM. And so, but how, what's wrong with CRM selection? How are these companies making mistakes when they're choosing a CRM? And what kind of things should they think about to just make better purchasing decisions for CRM?
So when I would typically lead requirements gathering or discovery sessions as a consultant, I had a rule. It was what I thought was going to be an easy rule to maintain, but it really wasn't. And if I was implementing Salesforce or building on top of Salesforce as a Salesforce architect, my challenge to anybody in the room as we were doing design sessions was, okay, tell me your business process, start to finish, from the moment something comes into your world until you're delivering value for the customer. Describe the steps without using the word Salesforce or whatever system it is. And you would be shocked at how difficult that is. So that 79% figure of people being dissatisfied with CRM, not surprising, but it's not the CRM's fault most of the time. It's just not understanding what you want the CRM to do for you. Okay. And it's really coming down to business capabilities that are going to be met by the technology. What do I want this technology to do? Okay, I want to be able to track contacts. All right, well, Act and Goldmine can do that. To blast from the past, a lot of CRMs can do that. I want to be able to track pipeline. Okay, cool. You can track pipeline in all these different tools. I want to be able to track interactions, phone calls, right? There's all these different business capabilities. I want to be able to send mass emails. I want to be able to segment lists of prospects based on criteria, right? These are all business requirements. And then once you have the business requirements in place, you sit down and you prototype that. And prototyping for me could be whiteboarding. It could be sticky notes. It could be just hacking something together on Figma. And you get everybody to say, yes, this is what we want, because this will get us from point A to point B. It'll satisfy all of our business requirements. It will give the experience to our customers that they're looking to get out of this. And you just kind of think of things that way. You think of what you want this to do in an ideal world, and then you go out and you evaluate the software. And then, I could go way off on a tangent here on build versus buy, but that type of discussion happens only after you have defined what you want the technology to do. We're putting the cart before the horse way too many times, and it results in dissatisfaction because, again, salespeople are salespeople. I know that company with the blue logo on the box could sell kryptonite to Superman. So you get a lot of companies who are like, wow, this software does all this stuff. And then they go to roll it out. And it's like, well, it doesn't do this stuff the way we want to do it. We don't know how to do it the way we want to do it. And we can't articulate the way we want it to work. So therefore, it's the software's fault. And I think that's where that big number comes from. I don't know how many times I've seen it. I hate Salesforce. I hate HubSpot. I hate all these tools, but they all kind of do the same thing. Maybe let's sit down and figure out what we want them to do before we go out and make large purchasing decisions.
Yeah, that's a big piece of it, obviously, is being super planful and clear on your requirements of what you really want it to do and how that's going to impact your business. One of the things that we hear from our customers, because we obviously have customers that switch from Salesforce, right, is that they end up saving money and in general, are able to train and implement it across their team just
Right.
more easily, more lightly, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right.
And so sometimes complexity can add to the challenge of implementation and the challenge of getting what you want.
Right. Complexity is the biggest part of it. So if you cut down on the number of permutations, the number of possibilities by narrowing down the number of possible moving parts, you're going to have naturally a much simpler solution. So again, kind of going back to the migration from legacy CRM to more modern CRM or more lightweight CRM, that's a big part of it. You're stripping out a lot of the features, right? A lot of the benefits that aren't really benefits. Like when companies announce large increases in their monthly prices to the tune of almost 10%, you sit down and you figure, well, what am I getting for this extra 9-10%? And you start to realize I have so many features and functions that I don't use. Why am I paying for it? So to go to a more simplistic solution, a solution that was designed with simplicity in mind, it allows you to just take a step back and say, okay, we were overkill here with whatever we were using before. We put a lot of time and money into it. We just weren't getting the value out of it. Let's go simple. Let's start over again. Let's do something much simpler. And there is huge value in simplicity. It's just the ability to start fresh, see things with clean eyes, and then build on top of a strong foundation, as opposed to trying to pick and choose from thousands of different features to try and figure out which one best suits your needs. You start simple. You build with your needs. You start to speak the language of the CRM that you're using. You integrate with your other systems and grow that organically and holistically. You're going to have much better results than plunking down, 7 figures for, again, legacy software that's going to take you a year and a half to implement, that 79% of you will not ever, be satisfied with. So start small, build from that foundation. I think you'll be much happier.
That's great final advice, Mike. So thanks for all those insights. And we're almost out of time. Any final thoughts for us on CRM and the future of it?
No, it's we're going through cycles right now, and we went through the cycle to SaaS in the cloud put Siebel out of business. Now we have legacy CRM vendors that are kind of getting long in the tooth, trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. So now with AI, with this new cycle, I'm really excited to see where CRM goes with this, just enterprise software in general. I'm excited for Insightly, just you guys are in this really sweet spot where you can capitalize on these shifts. So really looking forward to see your growth. Love being on here. Appreciate the opportunity. And, at some point in the future, if any of these predictions play out, let's talk about them again and figure out what comes next.
For sure. No, it's super great having your insights and your experience, Mike. So thanks again.
No, thank you.
And thanks to all of you for tuning in to Closing Time. Remember to like this video, subscribe to this channel, ring the bell for notifications so you don't miss any episodes, and we'll see you next time.